Hi guys, Andrew Hutchinson here, and in today's video for my channel, The Book Hutch, I'm going to be reviewing 5 books by hilarious women whom I love and appreciate so much. I've read their books over the last couple of years, and I've gotten something out of all of them, and as always, I would never put a book in any one of my videos if I didn't think it was worth checking out. Especially in this video, I know many people have differing opinions on comics and comedy, and so you might be a fan of some of the women I mentioned and maybe not others, or you might be a fan of all of them, but no matter what, I think reading every single one of these books was worthwhile. It helped me understand all of these people better, and so even if there's someone I mentioned on this list who maybe you don't enjoy their comedy so much, I'd still recommend giving it a shot. You might still learn more about them, and they all talk about different areas of human experience. And so I think no matter what, you'll walk away from each book learning something and having laughed, which right now in the middle of this coronavirus quarantine is something I think all of us could benefit from. And for an example, I have never been a fan of the comic Howard Stern. I think he's kind of crass, and I don't super enjoy his interview style, but he came out with a book recently, and I've heard positive things about it. I watched some interviews with him talking about it, and I've read a couple excerpts. I do plan on reading it in full and reviewing it later, but reading that actually has changed my perception of him, and it showed me there's a lot more to him than I thought. And so, though it's all right to have our preferences about people and especially about comics, I think always giving people a chance and finding out a little bit more about them is always worthwhile, is what I'm trying to say. And as a reminder too, with all of the books that I rate and review on this channel, even though I am a librarian at a public library, which is part of the reason why I made this channel to talk about library work, I also wanted to do book reviews since I have to read and rate and recommend so many books at my job anyway to patrons, which I love doing. These are always my personal views, and so if you have a differing or similar opinion about a book, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I always love to engage in that kind of discourse and find differing perspectives than what I have. I'm going to go a little bit into that when I review these books about the power of freedom of speech, and also that in this instance, I believe all of these women are held to such a higher standard than men in terms of what they do for freedom of speech, but I appreciate what every single one of them does. And so that's my little soapbox, and we'll get back to it in a little bit, but let's go ahead and dive into the first review. And remember, I don't always have the books with me, which is why I show them on my computer screen, so that way you could see what I'm talking about. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo by Amy Schumer. So Amy Schumer's an interesting one. I feel like she's probably the most divisive of the women I'm going to talk about on this list. It seems like people really love her or really don't love her. And I feel like that's because she is someone whose comedy really strikes a nerve. I feel like she's not afraid to go into political spaces. She's also not afraid to talk about body image. And I think that's incredibly brave. I tend to really gravitate towards people in the public eye who really push a different perspective. So like for instance in music, I really adore Madonna and Marilyn Manson, those people who always shock people, wake people up, and make them think differently. They might piss a lot of people off, but they're always trying to point out things in society for people to look at that's different than the norm. And so I always appreciate someone who does that, which is why I've always enjoyed Amy's comedy. I was a big fan of the show Inside Amy Schumer. So many skits on there I'll go back and rewatch from time to time. My favorite one is probably she's trying to contact a customer service agent named Janardin and struggles a bit, and I always think of that every time I'm on hold with a customer service agent for a long time. There's just so many things like that. But there's skits like that that relate to every day, but she also, like I said before, isn't afraid to create comedy content that really points out things like sexism, body image, etc. And so I commend her for that. So I was already a fan of her before I read her book a couple years ago, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. I really enjoyed it. I felt like she wrote it well. I learned a lot about her. And it's funny because all these people, like I just mentioned, who tend to push boundaries and are seen as extreme, they're actually pretty grounded people in their everyday lives. It's just they want to make people think. And so I was really delighted to read this book and see how grounded she is and open. And she talks a lot about why she got into comedy and the type of comedy she chooses to do, and also what she thinks of people's perceptions of her, especially since some of them are quite harsh. So I enjoyed that a lot. The reason I didn't give it higher than 3 stars is when I finished the book, I can't say I felt like I learned a huge life lesson, or I also really didn't feel the need that I wanted to reread it again a lot, like some of the books I'm going to talk about later. And so still very enjoyable. I definitely recommend reading her book, even if her comedy isn't your favorite. I think you'll learn more about her, and that's always valuable. But that's just kind of how I felt. I know since the publication of the book, she's gotten married and she's become a mom. And so I would definitely like to read another book from her in the future talking about motherhood. I'm sure she has hilarious stories and some interesting perspectives about that. And that also makes me think on SNL, one of my favorite skits I've ever seen, which she was in, was all about Mother's Day. And she's talking to her child, about the day they were born, and she's describing it as just this beautiful and magical experience. And then it cuts to her in the hospital, just like screaming and cussing people out due to the pain and just the contrast, but it shows the love is still there. And so, again, no matter what, I enjoyed the book. I definitely recommend reading it. I think you'll get at least something out of it. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. All right. The next book I'm going to talk about is Life Will Be the Death of Me and You Too by Chelsea Handler. Chelsea Handler has, I don't know, I have an interesting relationship with Chelsea Handler because growing up, I would see her on TV just in passing, especially a lot when I was in high school. And when I would watch her, I wasn't much a fan. I thought she was a bit harsh, and I just didn't connect with her very well. So I really didn't watch much or read much of her until I met my now husband, who is a pretty big fan of hers. And he was watching her Netflix show that she had for a while. And I started watching it with him, and what I really enjoyed about it was her sort of responding to the fact that when the election happened in 2016, she sort of had a wake-up call. She felt really shaken up by it, and it woke her up out of her everyday life. And she suddenly realized that there was a lot of things, politically and otherwise, in life that she actually didn't know a lot about. And so instead of just being angry or upset, she started inviting a lot of people onto her show that are experts, and she started asking them questions, and she sort of humbled herself and just said, I'm someone who actually doesn't know a lot about certain subjects, and I want to learn, so please teach me. And I really enjoyed that. I felt like it pulled a viewer like me in to learn more with her. I don't know how her original audiences felt about it, but I really enjoyed it. And so I'm happy I got to see this side of her. This was the first book I had ever read from her. I plan on reading some other ones, especially if she continues to write more in the future. I gave this 3.5 stars out of 5. I enjoyed her vulnerability in it. This is all a story about her deciding to go to therapy and what she's gotten out of therapy, because she finally realized, especially again after 2016, that there were some core wounds that she has never addressed. And so she decided to face them. And some of the chapters about that are really hard to read. A few times I really sat back and just had to take in what she was talking about. There's also plenty funny moments as well. After finishing, I'm not sure, like the last book, that I'll reread this one. But I did learn a few lessons from it, especially in regards to therapy and self-exploration. And so that's why I rated it 3.5 stars. And so, I very much would never have guessed that I would have read that book a couple of years ago, but I'm happy I did. And like I said, I will continue reading more from her in the future. The next book I'm going to talk about is Yes Please by Amy Poehler. And I love Amy Poehler so much. I have such a special place in my heart for her. Not only was I a fan of her on SNL, especially when I was in high school, but as soon as Parks and Rec started, I started watching it. And in college, it was always a show that I would watch during all of my finals weeks when I was really stressed and I just needed to laugh. There are still episodes I go back to again and again, like the Harvest Festival or the fight where she and the gang go to a bar and they all drink this stuff called snake juice. Fans of the show, you'll know what I'm talking about. But Parks and Rec is such a beautiful show, and I feel like it represents her as a person. Not only is she funny, but she also is just filled with heart. And that's what this book had in it. I gave it 4 stars. When I went into the book, I won't lie, I expected to laugh more while I was reading it because she's such a funny person. So I was a little bit surprised that I didn't laugh as much as I thought I would. But on the contrast, I think she went in a direction that most people didn't think she would go, but I'm actually very happy she went, which was a little bit more of a serious tone. When she talks about her childhood, when she talks about her relationships, when she talks about her perception of her own body, her appearance, she's not afraid to tell a lot of truth. And I feel like the most touching part of the book comes from her chapters on motherhood. And there's a particular scene she writes about with her sons that just made me cry reading it. And I'm so happy that she decided to open up that side of her, which we already got to see her as Leslie Knope on Parks and Rec, who also had that kind of side to her. But I just thoroughly enjoyed this novel. I might reread it once or twice in the rest of my life, but when I closed it, I just almost like hugged it to me. That's kind of how I felt with it. And I will forever be such a fan of hers. And so if you know a lot of her comedy, then you'll love it. But I think even if you don't know her super well, I think you'll still love this book. And so definitely give that book a shot. Especially if you're a mom. I think moms especially will really appreciate that book quite a lot. All right, the next book I'm going to discuss is Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. So I just finished this a couple days ago. I checked it out on my Libby app and listened to it as an audiobook. And I was actually listening to it while I was cleaning my house. We have wood walls, and so I was getting rags, and I was both washing and shining up a little bit of the walls around my house, which isn't the most exciting task. And so I felt like I wanted to listen to something that would make me laugh. And this did not disappoint. So I've been a fan of Anna Kendrick, especially since the Pitch Perfect movies came out. I've watched almost every interview I think she's had on a late night talk show, and she has some of the most brilliant comic timing I have ever seen. She's also immensely talented in music and acting. And so I already really appreciated her, but I didn't know a lot about her. And I don't think I fully grasped before this book just how funny she really is. And so I actually expected to laugh a little less when I went into this book. But oh my gosh, I laughed so much. And from literally the first line to the very end, I was 100% engaged. The story never lost me. I was hooked the entire time, which is why I gave this 4.5 stars. Not only, I think, because my expectations were so succeeded, which I'm not sure is really a fair thing to say, but because of that, but also just how well it was written. And I think the audiobook kind of made a difference. Listening to her narrate it was just incredible. And I would say if anyone is going to read this book, I highly recommend the audiobook. You will not regret it. And so I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I will probably reread it at least once every few years. So again, that's probably why that rating's a little bit higher, because it's one I can already tell that no matter how many times I listen to it, I'm always going to enjoy it. And I also didn't realize going into the book that she was so successful from a young age. She was on Broadway in her teen years. And so we all kind of thought of her as this breakout star as an adult when she was in Up in the Air with George Clooney, or again, the Pitch Perfect movies, or even Twilight. But no, she's been working hard her entire life. And so the title Scrappy Little Nobody really defines her well. And again, also just kind of like Amy Poehler's, there's really some amazing moments of heart. So there's something for everybody when reading that book, I think. All right, and last but certainly not least is the book Bossypants by Tina Fey. I consider this basically the crown jewel of comedy books. I remember reading it when I was in college. I had been a Tina Fey fan since my high school years, watching her obviously as Sarah Palin on SNL, which is kind of like when she came on my radar. When I was in college, I started watching 30 Rock, which is one of my favorite shows to watch. It was sort of tandem with Parks and Rec, where I would watch both during really stressful times in my life because they make me laugh. What's funny though is Parks and Rec, I feel like I quote more often and I remember more. 30 Rock, I don't remember as many specifics, but every time I watch it, I am just blown away by how funny it always is due to her genius. Also her writing the show Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Also, Mean Girls, which is one of my top 5 favorite comedy movies and at least top 10 favorite movies ever. Really like defined my generation, my age group, who are in their mid to late 20s right now. It just redefining the pop culture lexicon. And so not only is she a comedy icon, but she's a great writer. In not only her writing for SNL and these shows, but this book was just so magnificent. I loved learning about all the parts of her life, especially her childhood, her college years, and I think what everyone was waiting for, especially when this came out, was for her to talk about the time on SNL with Sarah Palin. And I think she addressed that time brilliantly because she sort of lampshaded the fact that everyone wanted to read that part of her book. And so, but sometimes celebrities will do things like, oh, I know you want to learn about this part. So they'll kind of gloss over it because they're like, you already know what happened. But no, she walks through the entire timeline of that era, what her life was like, and what she learned from it. And I'm someone who's interested in politics, as if you've watched my other videos, you'll probably know. So I was fascinated by that. She also talks about motherhood, what it's like to be a woman in comedy, and what about that label, what she thinks about that, her friendship with Amy Poehler. So there's just so much in this book, especially if you're a fan of hers. It's one of the few books I've ever given 5 stars. I think it's wholeheartedly deserved because for a 5-star book, I give it that rating if it makes me cry in some capacity, because it's very hard to make me cry, and that either can come from heartbreak or from laughter. And this one especially comes from laughter, where I cry many, many, many times while reading it just from laughter, where I literally have to set the book down and just laugh and laugh and laugh before I can pick it back up again. I also need to learn some lessons from it, especially pertaining to life, which I think I definitely did. And I do each time I read it. And also the readability factor and the repeat factor. And I will see myself rereading this as many times as I can throughout the rest of my life whenever I'm in the mood. And so Tina Fey, you did that and you did it well. And I don't know if she'll ever write another book. Like she'll maybe write a memoir later on in her later years. I hope so. I think it would be just as good. And it'll be so interesting to see where her career goes from now on, because it seems like she's achieved so much in the comedy world. I'm looking forward to whatever she continues to do in the future. I love this book so much. And so that's the 5 books. Again, I love and appreciate all of these women, especially because in this country, in the United States, we have the freedom of speech, and these women all use that not only to make us laugh, but to make us think. And they are definitely held to a higher standard than men in the amount of criticism and backlash they get for speaking their minds or talking about being women or talking about their bodies, whatever you want to define that as. But I'm just so thankful for them. And I know they've inspired so many people, both men and women. And I don't think you'll be disappointed by a single book on this list. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, if you have any similar differing opinions on any of these books, feel free to let me know in the comments and use your freedom of speech as well. And or feel free to message me and let me know if there's any other books by men or women that are really funny that you think I'll enjoy. I definitely want to do at least one other comedy book review video sometime in the future because I enjoy comedy so much. But until then, thank you so much for checking out this channel. Whether you're a returning viewer or you're brand new, I highly appreciate it. Sometimes I feel like I'm just talking out into the void and filling time while I'm in quarantine, but I've already gotten some messages, and I know that some of you really do appreciate these book review videos. And even if you don't work at a library or interested in library, check out my library videos too. You might be intrigued by some of the things I have to share about being a librarian as well. And so, but no matter why you're here, thank you for being here. I'm done rambling. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a great rest of your day. I love you all. Bye.